Hi, I'm Larry Richardson and welcome back for the second episode of Sea Level Rise Real Estate. Now in the first episode, the introduction, we talked about how sea level rise is impacting communities and what the risk is in general terms for buyers, sellers, owners, and real estate agents. In this episode, we're going to focus on the buyers, issues that buyers should examine, should research when they're moving into coastal areas. And although this is focused on buyers, sellers, owners, and real estate agents should also be interested in this information because it's going to impact what they do if they get involved in a real estate transaction with a property that floods or is at risk of flooding or is in a community that is experiencing sea level rise flooding. And buyers, I have to be honest with you, it's not easy to tell if a property floods. You'd think it would be, but it's not. First of all, in many states, sellers have to tell you in detail if a property floods. Those are the good states, but in a lot of other states, they don't. For example, in Virginia, it's pretty much wide open at this point. It is let the buyer beware. So the buyer literally has to go in and figure out, does this property that I'm interested in flood? And one point I'm going to make right now for buyers is before you submit any kind of real estate offer in a coastal area, you have to figure out what's going on with sea level rise. The next thing is, if you can't count on sellers in their disclosure necessarily to tell you if the property floods, who else can you count on? Will your real estate agent know? Not necessarily. I live in a community right now that has flooding, where properties are being flooded by sea level rise. And I see a mix of agents who are either kind of aware of it, I will count those as the good guys, the other ones who aren't aware only because they're just not paying attention. And then there are agents who are denialists who, quite frankly, I count among the most dangerous agents you can encounter because they're basically saying there's sea level rise right in front of you, but sea level rise flooding, but you're not seeing it. It doesn't matter. Oh, just buy the property. Those are dangerous agents. And I will tell you, for me, the way I would tell if an agent is on the up and up is I would do a little bit of research before I teamed up with the agent. I would find out, is there sea level rise flooding in that community? What's the nature of the sea level rise flooding? Is this specific property being flooded because it's in that neighborhood? Then I would go and interview agents. If you run into agents who said, yeah, it's a problem, and I'm going to help you steer through this. Those are the best agents. If you find agents who aren't knowledgeable, but they're willing to find out for you if sea level rise flooding is a problem, then you might want to team up with them. If you find out there is sea level rise flooding in that community on your own, but an agent says either flat out no, or they tell you, yeah, there's flooding there, but it's no problem, that's a denialist. And I can't tell you what to do, but I would run. I would not work with them because you want someone who's going to find you a property in a coastal area that brings you the most enjoyment. Now, the next thing is, so we've said sellers and real estate agents aren't necessarily the most reliable sources for this information. Surprisingly, flood insurers aren't either. Do you want to know why? Because a lot of them are relying on flood maps provided by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, that are extremely, extremely outdated and inaccurate. In fact, a lot of people have purchased homes in areas that were supposedly outside the flood zones, and they got flooded. And FEMA is just not keeping up. Not only that, but they don't, at this point, when this video was made, consider sea level rise flooding or king tide flooding, which is that astronomically high tide flooding that we get in the fall due to the alignment of the sun and the moon. It's a little complicated, but anyways, They don't consider that when they draw those maps up. So if you're in an area that's impacted by sea level rise flooding or king tide flooding, they're not going to tell you. And people are buying properties in neighborhoods that are hit by that, and they have no idea. The insurer doesn't necessarily have to tell them that. Another issue you have to consider is that there are privacy laws that prevent flood insurers from telling you outright if a property floods. They are supposed to, these laws are supposed to protect the seller. So you don't get the report. The only way you can find out is if the seller orders a clue report for you. That's what clue is. If the seller will order that report, then you will have a pretty good idea if the property floods and the structures have been impacted and claims have been filed in the past against that property. And you really need to know that, because if there are past claims made against a property and then the property floods on you, then your flood insurance premiums go sky high. They could just go through the roof because it's a distressed property. And there are limits, and this is very, very unfortunate. There are limits to the clue report itself. In many cases, they only cover 5 to 7 years back of flooding. And then the other problem is not every flood insurance provider gives information or provides information to that database. So the clue report itself it could either be non-existent or it could be faulty. So, okay, so here we are. We've gone through the sellers, we've gone through real estate agents and insurers. Mortgage providers, now they want the information, they want the flood information. They're going to make you buy flood insurance, but again, they might not know, because they might not be anywhere near where you're making the purchase, and they're actually relying on the flood insurance providers to give them the information that might be faulty. So that's another problem. I think that one of the things that may be of great value is to combine all of those sources, query all of those sources to find out if there's flooding, and then canvass the neighborhood. I really don't recommend that you go knocking on doors, not in this day and age, because people are just so nervous about people approaching their property, about strangers approaching their property. And I gotta tell you, in Florida, if you approach someone's property and you, for whatever reason, cause them to freak out, understand your ground, you could get shot. So I'm just saying, don't go knocking on doors. What I recommend is at the busy times of day, really mainly in the evening when people are out walking their dogs, when they're out chatting, when business might be a little bit slow, if there are businesses in the neighborhood, go in there and ask them if they're, or meet with the neighbors out on the street, or go into one of the businesses and ask them if sea level rise flooding is a problem at that location. Ideally, they'll be able to tell you if a specific property floods. So that's really the nucleus of what buyers can do to protect their financial interests when they're considering making a purchase in a coastal area. Now, I have more in-depth information on this topic, more tools and more resources for buyers in my book, 7 Sea Level Rise Real Estate Questions. It's a little book posted on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format, a little book that can save you a huge amount of money because it does discuss in a holistic sense the threat of sea level rise flooding. And this flooding, it's not going away. And it's only going to get worse. And the other thing that buyers need to consider, that again is in this book, is taxes. What's going to happen with taxes? If you go into a city that's experiencing sea level rise flooding and it's either wrecking the infrastructure, which is happening in some communities, along the coast, it's either wrecking like the wastewater, the sewerage infrastructure, and it might cost, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to repair, or to hold the waters back, a city is deciding to put up seawalls, to install pumps at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. If you buy in that area and you become a taxpayer, you're going to end up with a piece of that action, and it can be very expensive. Whether the city charges you as a taxpayer or the city does it as a bond issue, ultimately you're going to have to pay for that. And the other concern is what's going on with flood insurance. If flood insurance is, if the flood insurers are starting to see a lot of claims in an area due to sea level rise flooding, then your premiums could spike. These are just the basic questions you need to ask. If you're going into an area that has a condo association or a homeowners association that has to raise seawalls, raise docks, protect its infrastructure, the parking lots, their drainage system, the electrical system, the common areas, again, you can end up with a piece of that, and it can be very expensive. This book talks about every one of those issues, and it's right now only $3.99 in Kindle format, $6.99 paperback. And you can find the link to it on my website, sealevelriserealestate.com. And I hope you will. I hope you'll take a look, because again, I'm giving you kind of a broad outlook, a broad overview for buyers in this video. And in the next video, I'm going to address the issues that should be of concern to sellers. And taken as a whole, this book will give you, again, it's a little book with a lot of information, 100 pages. This book will give you a good basic understanding of what sea level rise is, the threat posed by sea level rise flooding currently and in the future for a property, and what you can do about it. I give you the toolkit, the questions you need to ask so you can make an informed, a smart decision. So I'm Larry Richardson. I hope you're going to join me for the next edition. The next episode for sellers, again, it will be of concern to buyers, owners, and real estate agents too, because if you enter into a real estate transaction, chances are you're going to deal with a seller. So I'll see you in the next episode.